My son announced at his engagement party, "Don't expect to be involved in our wedding, you're just here for the show," as the guests cheered. But when the venue manager thanked me for paying for everything in advance, his face went red with shock. His ego collapsed. The first thing you need to know is how loud a room can get when it decides you don't matter. Picture a hall washed in warm lights, tea candles trembling in shallow glass bowls, a string quartet doing their delicate best to be heard over laughter. Picture me at a small table behind a pillar, my name printed on a place card that just says Dad, the D crooked like it's apologizing. Before I tell you what my son said into the gold microphone, humor an old man and tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. I want to know how far this kind of thing reaches, how many living rooms and bus rides and night shifts this story will travel through, because the sound I heard that night, cheering for a punchline with my name on it, seems to echo in every city at once. He tapped the mic. The room hushed. He flashed the grin I used to call his first day of school grin, the one that could sell you sunshine on a rainy day. He put an arm around his fiance's waist and raised his glass. "We're so grateful you're all here," he said. "Family, friends, everyone who supported us." Then he looked in my direction, not at me exactly, but toward the pillar that blocked me, and he smiled a little wider. "And Dad," he said, "don't expect to be involved in our wedding. You're just here for the show." There was a half second where the words hung in the air like a coin that hasn't decided which side it wants to land on. Then the coin fell. The room erupted, cheers, whistles, a few "That's right!" from the corner where the bridesmaids gathered. The MC laughed too loudly, thinking that's what professionalism looked like. Someone behind me patted my shoulder, that friendly, clumsy pat people give when they're not sure if you're the joke or the punchline. I placed my glass on the table, not a clink, not a tremble. Just a quiet, careful landing that said more than any toast. Not anger, something colder. I could feel the cold as clearly as I felt the weight of my phone buzzing in my pocket. One soft vibration with the subject line I had already memorized. All confirmations received. "Congratulations, Mr. Malik. I didn't take it out. Not yet." People say grief sharpens you or softens you. If that's true, my grief did both. When my wife died, the world split into edges and cushions. Some days, I needed the edges to cut through fog. Other days, I needed a cushion to put my head on and breathe. That night, I chose the edge. I sat up straight. I folded my napkin in a neat square. I kept my eyes on the glass centerpiece, where a single white rose leaned into the candlelight, like it had secrets to tell. My son laughed. With his fiancée and her parents, the four of them a perfect picture. He didn't look at me again. Maybe he thought I'd like it better in the shadows. Maybe he had started to believe his own stories about me. If you're following so far, tell me your city. Karachi, London, Toronto, Faisalabad, wherever your feet touch the ground tonight. I want your city stitched into this story like names sewn inside a wedding dress, because what happened next didn't belong to a single man or a single room. It belongs to anyone who has lifted a child up and then watched that child forget who did the lifting. The waiters came around with oysters on cracked ice and the signature drink, something peach-colored and sweet, named after the couple. A tray stopped at our table, hovered, and then moved on as if my chair were empty. It didn't bother me. I already knew the bartender's name was Adil, and I already knew he would find me later without me having to lift a hand. It's funny what you can see when you stop demanding to be seen. In the corner, the bride's mother adjusted her shawl and gave me a sympathetic smile that had victory tucked inside it. The bride's father checked his watch and checked it again, fingers drumming on the glass. Their nervousness tasted like lemons. They were riding my son's swagger the way people ride a bus. Pay the fare, hope it doesn't break down. I didn't always live like this, measuring a room by pauses and corners. There was a time when life was simply my wife's laughter in the kitchen, the smell of cardamom and butter, our boy running through the hallway with socks too big for his feet and a tie too small for his neck. I can still see her kneeling, steadying his chin with one finger, teaching him to shape the knot. "One day," she told him, smiling with that tired, bright smile she wore when love outweighed sleep, "you'll stand in front of people you love. Remember to let them stand with you." He nodded. He didn't understand then. I did. I always did. On game days, we sat in the bleachers wrapped in her scarf, clapping until our palms burned. When he scored, he looked up every time, scanning the crowd for the two faces that were a lighthouse in any weather. He would grin when he found us. That boy used to run into my chest so hard, it knocked the wind out of me. Somewhere along the way, that same boy learned to stand on a stage and pretend the lighthouse was a street lamp you could switch off. Lately, there had been signs. You learn to hear the hum of disrespect long before it blasts through speakers. This past birthday, he sent a digital card with only initials typed at the bottom. No call. Busy, he texted when I sent a small thumbs up so he would know I saw it. Busy. A week later, the code on the gate to my own villa changed. He said it was for security. You don't need it right now, he added, like access to your own door is a seasonal fruit. Then there was the wedding group chat, heard about from a friend's friend because a meme labeled sponsor was passed around with my face on a stock photo of a man holding a credit card. I laughed aloud when I saw it. I wasn't angry. The anger had burned off already, like fog in the noon sun. What was left was the map. I study maps. I always have. A quiet man learns the streets before he moves his car. So when he told me, weeks ago, we don't need your opinions, just your presence, I nodded, like a man who has nothing left to do but nod. I asked for the vendor list so I wouldn't duplicate transfers, which made the bride's father cough into his fist, his way of laughing without showing teeth. I took the list. I met each vendor in person. I shook hands. I used my wife's memorial foundation to pay deposits, to pay balances, to pay for things people forget have to be paid for. Overtime for the band, insurance for the venue, corkage fees, the florist's early morning delivery surcharge, the photographer's second lens. The contracts were clear, the primary client of record was my name and the foundation. Any changes needed my written approval. If behavior turned public and ugly, if the primary client was mocked or denigrated, services would pause for review. Refunds in that case would not flow toward the couple or their families. They would return to the foundation and, from there, to scholarships in my wife's name. I didn't hide any of this from myself. I hid it only from the people who were busy laughing at the word sponsor. When you hear, "You're just here for the show," it helps to know you own the stage. But I didn't come to punish anyone. I came to keep a promise to the woman who taught us to tie knots and to stand shoulder to shoulder. She left me a velvet box with a ring she never got to slide onto our son's finger. Under the lid, she wrote in careful blue ink, "For the day respect becomes a man." That line had lived under my skin. It hummed now as the quartet shifted from Vivaldi to something airy and modern, as the scent of eucalyptus lifted off the table arrangements like a calm sea breeze, as a young cousin whispered, "He really said that?" and then giggled because it felt like rebellion to laugh at your elders. The MC worked the crowd like he was afraid of silence, cueing toasts in a flurry. When it ought to have been my turn, he forgot me, on purpose or by instruction, I can't say. I waited for the pause that all good rooms must take, and when it came, I stood. It was not a big stand. It was a stand the way a door closes, smooth, definite. I didn't go to the mic. I didn't need the room to hear me. I needed the room to feel me choose not to push. "To love that listens," I said from my place behind the pillar, my voice low, meant for those who wanted to hear. To promises kept when no one claps. A few heads turned, someone coughed. A waiter, brave or simply kind, dipped the tray to me and I took a glass. "Thank you, Adil," I said, and he blinked, surprised that I had learned his name among all the names that were thrown around with tips and snaps. The bride's mother leaned to the bride and whispered. The bride's jaw set. My son looked at me for the first time that night. There was that look children get when they test how far they can move the line. I've seen it since he tried to slip biscuits before dinner. I've seen it the day he borrowed the car and returned it with a dent. No one could explain. It is the face of a person waiting to see if a boundary is real. I met his gaze and gave him nothing. No flinch, no smile, just a slow blink that didn't concede the smallest inch. He lifted his glass again. "You're just here for the show." And people laughed easier the second time. Rehearsed meanness always lands better. Outside the tall windows, the city glowed in strips of light. I could see our reflections in the glass, the couple bright and gold, me a quieter figure threaded with candle flame. I remembered the last hospital night. My wife's breath was a thin thread. She held my wrist and squeezed with a strength that belonged to another body. "Raise him," she said, "but don't chase him. If he runs from the house we built, let him feel the cold. Cold teaches." I said I would. I didn't know the cold would be a ballroom where people clapped for a line that put me in a box labeled showpiece. She would have hated that word. She would have smiled while she hated it. And then she would have cleaned the kitchen and made sure everyone left with leftovers, because her grace was not a performance. It was her religion. My phone buzzed again. The email with confirmation sat unread, but I could see the preview. Venue, paid in full. Catering, paid in full. Band, paid in full. Florist, photographer, officiant, paid. Honeymoon deposit, secured. Authorization code attached. The code had weight the way a key does when you hold it in your palm and remember the first day you turned it in a new lock. I kept my hand in my pocket, not to clutch at power, but to steady myself against the urge to stand and defend a dignity that did not need defending. I breathed. I watched. I let the night tell me what it was going to be. You might ask why I didn't stand, slam a fist, demand respect in the language people think respect understands. I'll tell you why. Yelling is a match. It burns fast. It leaves smoke. Quiet is a pilot light. It waits and it warms the room when you need it to. My wife taught me that. Years ago when the boy was 12 and lied about where he'd been, I came in hot. She shook her head. Not today, she whispered. Don't make him remember your voice as a storm. Make him remember it as a harbor he has to earn his way back to. I've kept that lesson like a coin in my pocket ever since. You rub it when you're tempted to spend it on something cheap. The couple made rounds, hugging, posing, performing their happiness, which, to be fair, I believe was real under the layers of pride and pressure. Pride is a suit that fits well until you try to raise your arms and realize you can't. Pressure is a tie pulled too tight, and people confuse dizziness for confidence. When my son reached my table at last, there was a flicker in his eyes. The boy who once searched for us in the bleachers, who once ran straight into me at the door after school, smelling like dust and chalk, breathless with stories. The flicker went out. "Dad," he said, casual as a man commenting on weather. "You all right back here?" "Perfect view," I said evenly, and it was true. A pillar can hide you, or it can give you a frame. "Good," he said, already turning his body back to the room, the music, the clink and swirl. The bride took his hand and kissed his cheek. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her parents had that covered. They glanced at me as if I were an antique that might be valuable or might be a replica. You don't know until an expert tells you. They are not the villains of this story, by the way. There are no villains. There are choices and there are costs. If you're still with me, tell me your city, your street if you feel brave, the color of the sky where you are. I'm asking because these details keep me from turning this into a fairy tale with a neat ending. Real life has fingerprints. It smells like eucalyptus and lemon and warm glass. It has a deal behind the bar, wiping a spill he didn't make. It has an MC who looks at me and then looks away. It has a venue manager heading toward me from the corridor with a leather folder and the careful stride of someone who knows which names are on the line. I saw him before my son did. I knew what was in the folder before he opened his mouth. I sat a little straighter, folded my napkin again, and kept my voice stored where it belonged, ready, low, steady, like a key that has not yet met the lock it was cut for. The venue manager reached me like a man walking a tightrope, balanced and sure, a leather folder tucked under his arm, and a small, respectful smile set on his face. He had the kind of posture that tells you he has been trained to speak clearly and never whisper important things. He stopped just to my left, angled his body so he did not block the aisle, and dipped his head. "Mr. Malik," he said, and even the way he said my name felt like cold water on a flame someone else had been trying to fan. "Thank you for paying for everything in advance. Venue, catering, the quartet, the band for later, the florist, the photographer, the officiant, and the honeymoon deposit. Your wire cleared this morning. We have all confirmations. Congratulations." His voice carried just enough to be heard by the nearest 10 people, which turned out to be exactly the 10 people who needed to hear it. Silence spilled into the space where laughter had been. It moved like a shadow, fast and absolute. My son turned as if he had been tugged by an invisible thread. The grin stumbled on his mouth, and for a moment I saw the boy again, the one who used to search for us in the stands and light up when he found us. That light tried to climb back into his face and then slid away. His cheeks went the color of ripe tomatoes, neck blotching. He cleared his throat, but nothing helpful came out. He blinked at the manager, then at me, then at the manager again, as if the two of us together made a picture he couldn't make sense of. Around us, napkins were lowered and glasses paused mid-air. The bride's mother's sympathetic smile died and left only her teeth. The bride's father lifted his hands, let them fall, looked at the ceiling as if the light fixtures might give him guidance. "Paid," my son said finally, one word that felt like a card laid down too late in a game he thought he had already won. "You paid?" I kept my voice flat, the way you keep a table level so nothing spills. "I arranged what you wanted," I said. "A beautiful show." There was no heat on the words. Heat would have made it smaller. The manager, helpful without overstepping, added, "Any changes or approvals still require your authorization code, sir, as stipulated in the agreements." He pat the leather folder like a man patting a horse to keep it calm. The bride's eyes flickered to the folder, and then to me. She was quick, I'll give her that. You could see her doing the math behind her eyes, adding up the words, primary client, adding the foundation's name, subtracting the power she thought she held simply by being the focus of the room. The MC swallowed hard into his mic and delivered a sound that was half laugh, half hiccup. "Well, a round of applause for generosity," he said, voice wobbling like a table with one short leg. No one clapped. They weren't sure who they would be clapping for. My son took a step toward me. The floor didn't move, but he looked like a man trying to find his balance on a train that had just started. "Dad," he said, soft at first, then sharper, "why would you do that behind my back?" "I didn't," I said. "I did it behind you. That's where fathers stand until they're told not to." The words slid out of me clean and simple, a knife with no flourish. His mouth opened, then shut. The bride's mother leaned in and whispered something into her daughter's ear. The daughter didn't take her eyes off me. Her face was a smooth lake. Only the pupils darted, small fish searching for a safe rock. The manager, bless him, did the exact right thing at the exact right time. He said, "If you prefer, sir, we can discuss any details in the corridor. I only meant to thank you." He meant it. A man who took pride in saying thank you to the hand that signed things on time. I stood, folding my napkin once more and setting it square. "Let's not hold up your party," I said to my son, letting the word "your" hang in the air without accusation. "Come." My hand did not lift. I walked first. Not because I wanted to lead him, but because I wanted to give him the extra second silence gives you to choose who you are about to be. Tall doors opened on their hinges with a sigh, and the corridor wrapped us in cooler air and the faint smell of lemon cleanser, metal, and the distant warmth of the kitchen. We stepped out of the performance and into the narrow truth that runs behind every stage. The manager held the leather folder like an offering and spoke in a tone that treated everyone as if they were adults, which is rarer than it should be. "As you requested, Mr. Malik, all vendor agreements list you and the foundation as primary client of record," he said. "Invoices are paid in full. Any modifications or vendor contact must go through you. We also have your written clause regarding conduct. I can fetch copies if you—" "That's fine," I said. "Thank you." I could feel my son beside me, heat coming off him, not rage exactly, but the embarrassment that arrives when your story of yourself has a hole in it and everyone can suddenly see through. He tugged at his tie like it had shrunk. The bride slipped into the corridor a heartbeat later, her parents in tow. The MC stayed back, hovering at the threshold, with the mic still in his hand, as if the mic would protect him from the weather. "What clause?" the bride asked, voice trying to be sweet and landing instead on brittle. The manager glanced at me. I nodded. He opened the folder with the lightest touch, lifted a sheet, and read a paragraph that was simple on purpose, words a layperson could follow. If the primary client is publicly denigrated or excluded by the beneficiaries, all services pause pending review, with refunds processed to the primary client's foundation per agreement. No services may resume without written authorization from the primary client. The bride's father coughed into his fist, his favorite habit, and looked at his shoes. The bride's mother began a sentence with, "Surely," the way people do when they're about to request the world bend back into the shape they prefer. "Surely this is a misunderstanding," she said. "We were only teasing earlier. It's a young crowd." She tried for a laugh. It sounded like a spoon clinking against an empty jar. My son looked at me then with something like pleading under the flush. "Dad," he said, You could have just told me. I tried, I said, not unkindly. I asked to be part of the planning. You told me I'd be in the way. Tonight, you told me I'm here for the show. If I'm the audience, I bought a ticket, that's all. It was a joke, he said too quickly, like someone throwing a blanket over a flame that is already taller than they are. A bad one. I got carried away. People laughed. There are armies in the world that have not marched as far as some. And men will march to stand on the hill of. People laughed. The bride's eyes flicked to his, checking whether she should lean into his line or abandon it. She chose the line, lightly. He didn't mean it, she said to me, softer. It was meant to be playful. She had a ring on that caught the corridor light and scattered it across the white wall in small stars. I thought of my wife's ring in the velvet box at home, the handwriting inside the lid, blue letters tidy and certain. Playful as a dog in a park, I said. This was a stage. You used the mic. The words were gentle. Gentle can be heavy if you place it correctly. The manager closed the folder and hugged it back to his chest. He took a small step back, not to leave, but to make a little space around us. The MC, still holding that poor mic like a flotation device, tried to smile at me. He failed. The corridor hummed softly with electricity and the far clink of plates. I thought of the kitchen staff in their white jackets, doing work that never gets toasted. I am not a man who enjoys humiliation, and I have no appetite for revenge dressed as justice. I love my son. I loved him when he scraped his knees on the driveway and lied about the cause. I loved him when he stayed out too late and came home smelling like beer and apologies. I loved him when he got into a school that made him too proud for a year and then humbled him the next. I loved him when he stood at a hospital window and cried in a way he didn't want me to see, because he didn't know how to say goodbye to his mother without breaking something he needed to keep. Loving him didn't mean handing him the keys and walking away when he drove the car into a wall. Sometimes love is stepping in, quietly, and pointing at the wheel, like, try again. Walk with me, I said, not because the corridor was long, but because moving helps some men think. He nodded. The bride came too. Her parents hung back, the mother tapping her phone, the father counting something in his head, courage or costs. We reached a small window where you could see the city spread flat and bright. For a long, honest second, none of us spoke. The quiet did a kind of work you can't hire done. When my son finally spoke, he said a line that was wrong and right at once. I didn't think this mattered to you, he said. The planning and all that. It matters how you treat people, I said. It matters who you let cheer when you make someone small. It matters that you forgot the house your mother built and invited people to laugh at the man who was still paying to keep the lights on. He flinched at the mention of his mother. He always does. The grief isn't gone. He has just been putting a jacket on it. Jackets are useful until summer comes. I didn't invite anyone to laugh, he muttered, weak even to his own ears. You made the room laugh, I said. Own it. The bride touched his arm. Say you're sorry, she whispered, almost like she was telling him to loosen his tie. He looked at her, at me, at the manager behind us pretending to admire a sconce, at the MC still hovering at the door like a cartoon character trying not to be seen. I'm sorry, he said, but he said it to the floor. Look at me, I said. He did. Try again, I said. I'm sorry, he said, and this time it was aimed at my face. It was still the size of a coin. I needed something worth more, but I wasn't going to snatch it from his hand. A man has to decide what kind of currency he will deal in. Good, I said. Hold that. I took the leather folder from the manager and eased one page halfway out. I didn't wave it. I didn't make a sermon of it. The bride's eyes followed it, like a cat tracking a thread. These agreements, I said, protect your wedding from chaos. They protect the staff from people who change their minds and leave bills unpaid. They protect the memory of your mother from being used as a theme rather than a value. They also protect me from being turned into a joke I must fund. That's all they are. Protection. Structure. I slid the page back in. Now, we can let the night be what you advertised, a celebration, or I let the words sit there, cold and available, like a chair at a table no one wants to take. Or we review. The bride's mother found her way to us then, breath a little high, eyes bright with the kind of energy people get when they smell a mess that might stain their clothes. There's no need for threats, she said. We are all family now. She liked the word now. It put her on the inside of something she had been reaching for since the engagement was announced. "There are no threats," I said. "There is a contract, and there is a choice." My son stared at me with a kind of stubborn softness that looked like a boy and a man trying to share the same face. "What choice?" he asked. "The simple kind," I said. "The kind a man makes when he decides whether he wants to be proud or to be right." He frowned. "They're the same thing," he said, reflex in his mouth. I shook my head. "Not tonight." The manager, who had the good sense to know when to disappear, nodded to me and to my son and slipped away, carrying the knowledge that he had done his part. The MC finally retreated, mumbling something about checking the playlist. The corridor belonged to us. Music drifted through the door, the quartet moving through a melody that had bones. Adil passed with a tray and gave me a quick secret nod. He knew. Not the details, not the clauses, but the feeling of a room that had shifted to a lower gear. "Dad," my son said, softer now, the redness cooling. "I messed up." There it was, the thing with weight. "Yes," I said. "You did." He swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing in his neck. "I thought—" He stopped. He started again. "Everyone expects me to be, I don't know, big, funny, in charge. I thought if I made it a line, it would feel less like I'm drowning in plans that aren't mine." It was the truest thing he'd said all night. The bride looked at him with a surprise I couldn't tell if she liked. Her hand on his sleeve loosened. "You can be big without stepping on the person who taught you to stand," I said. "You can be funny without inviting a room to laugh at the one man who would carry you out if the roof fell in. And you can be in charge by listening to the people who built the walls that hold the roof up." He blinked, and some of the tumbling stopped behind his eyes. He looked past me into the window, saw his own reflection, and didn't love what he saw. Good. Mirrors are teachers when you let them be. "Okay," he said finally, nodding like a man agreeing with a judge's sentence he knows he deserves. "What do you want me to do?" The question was good. It was also not the whole thing. I let it hang. The bride's mother opened her mouth to fill the silence with something perfumed and useless. I lifted a hand a fraction, and she closed it again. The bride watched me and waited, which told me something about her that did not match the voice she had used on the microphone. The city outside kept shining like it didn't care, which is one of the city's best qualities. "I'm going to tell you what I will do," I said. "Then you will tell me what you will do." He nodded, wary but willing. I looked at the door, at the shadow of people moving on the other side, at celebration waiting for us to either poison it or sweeten it. I slipped the folder back to the manager, who had returned just far enough to receive it. "Thank you," I said. He faded again, a good ghost. The corridor felt larger now that the paper was no longer between us. Sometimes the smallest barrier is a stack of words. "I will keep my promise to your mother," I said, and the words settled all the noise inside me. "I will not raise my voice. I will not embarrass you for the sake of satisfaction. I will protect the people working tonight, because this is their livelihood. I will protect the money that carries your mother's name, because it buys books for children who never get invited to rooms like this. I will not be small just because you tried to make me small. These are my choices." He breathed out like he had been underwater. The bride squeezed his arm once, and he didn't shake her off. Good again. "Now," I said, letting the quiet fall a second time. "The way a teacher lets chalk touch the board without pressing, what will you do?" He looked at me the way a man looks at a locked door, and finally admits the key might be in his own pocket. "I'll fix it," he said. It was simple. It was also the first true sentence of the night. I let the quiet sit on it for a beat so it could settle into him, into me, into the corridor that smelled faintly of lemon and heat from the kitchen. "How?" I asked, because men grow through verbs, not vows. He swallowed, glanced at the window where the city shrugged its shoulders in lights, then back at me. "I'll apologize," he said, voice level now, like he had found the floor under his shoes again. "Out there, not just to you, out there. I'll say exactly what I did, and that it was wrong." The bride's hand slid down his sleeve and closed around his fingers in a way that told me she had been waiting to feel that steadiness too. "Good," I said. "A clear apology does not wear perfume. No jokes glued to the end. Own it. Name it." He nodded. "And then," I added, "you take action that proves the words have bones. You add me to the planning chat. You restore the gate code to my villa, and you say the new one out loud, not in a text that gets lost under memes. You invite me to one decision this week that matters, band, vows, or seating, and you listen when I speak, and you will thank people by name. Start with the people who carried tonight. I tilted my head toward the door. A deal behind the bar, the quartet, the kitchen, the manager who stood between you and a mess you didn't see coming. I didn't say it like a list. I said it like a map. He followed it with his eyes. What about the contracts? He asked, darting a look at the leather folder tucked again under the manager's arm. The bride's mother tried a sigh that wanted to be dignified and landed closer to theatrical. We can surely simplify, she began. I raised a finger the width of a heartbeat. She stopped. The contracts stay, I said to my son, not to her. They protect the work and the workers, and they protect your mother's name. I won't use them to humiliate you. I will use them if you forget yourself again. He breathed out a small, honest surrender. Okay. The MC peeked his head around the door like a child testing water with a toe. Whenever you're ready, he whispered into a live mic, which is a kind of comedy that doesn't need a punchline. My son squared his shoulders. The bride lifted her chin. We walked back into the room, and the sound folded around us. Silver on glass, the quartet's bow easing across strings. Someone laughing too loudly at something that wasn't funny. The manager drifted ahead, and with a subtle gesture, the music thinned. The MC held out the mic with two hands as if it were a holy thing. My son didn't take it right away. He looked at me. I kept my face as calm as the lake on winter mornings, when the pine smell sits heavy and patient. He took the mic. Everyone, he said, and the word hung there, testing its own weight. The group turned, chairs shifted, the bridesmaids put their heads together like birds on a line. He cleared his throat once. I said something earlier that was wrong, he began. No jokes. Good. I tried to be clever and ended up being cruel. I told my father he was just here for the show. That wasn't playful. It was disrespectful. The bride's mother set her glass down so quickly it clicked against the table. The bride stood next to him and did not touch the mic. She let him stand alone in the place he had earned. My father, he went on, steady now, has stood behind me my entire life. Tonight he stood behind me again, and I used the microphone to make that small. I'm sorry. He turned his head to me, eyes wide open. The room followed his gaze to where I stood near the pillar that had been my curtain a half hour earlier. I didn't nod. I didn't wave it off. I let the apology land in me like a seed meeting dirt. Seeds are not a meal, but they are a start. I want him involved in our wedding, he said, not as a sponsor, not as an afterthought, but as my father. I'm adding him to our planning chat tonight. He will help us make decisions, and we will begin by honoring my mother properly, which I should have done from the start. That line loosened something behind my ribs I didn't know I had been holding. The bride stepped to the mic then, gently. I'm sorry too, she said, and she looked at me directly, which can be a small bravery in a crowded room. I thought we could laugh our way through the hard parts. That's not how you build a family. We want to reserve a chair for your wife. She corrected herself without losing stride. For your mother. We'll place her scarf there if you're willing to bring it, and we'll end the night with her favorite song. In the corner, the band leader who would later replace the quartet lifted his chin at me, the quiet promise of a professional who knows how to tuck a last song into a night like a love letter into a pocket. The applause that followed wasn't fireworks. It was rain, soft, everywhere at once, cleansing more than it celebrated. I preferred it. Under the patter, I heard a different music. The clatter of relief in the kitchen, glassware shivering in a waiter's hands as the room's temperature returned to human. My son wasn't done. Also, he said, and his voice warmed a degree, thank you to the people who made tonight work despite me. A deal, he called, and the bartender's head snapped up and he almost dropped the shaker. You ran that bar like a captain. Thank you, Adil, now made of 10 feet of pride, lifted the shaker like a trophy. The quartet, beautiful. The staff in the kitchen, thank you. And Mr. Qureshi, he said to the venue manager, thank you for managing the details I didn't even know existed. I won't lie, that part touched me more than the words aimed at me. Gratitude spoken to people who rarely get it is a light that reaches the corners of a room first. People sat a little taller, smiled with their teeth and not just their lips, shook off the stiffness that comes from watching someone misbehave and not knowing where to place your eyes. The bride's mother adjusted her shawl, preparing some gentle spin she could tell over coffee tomorrow about youth and nerves. But the bride cut a glance so clean, it sliced that plan into ribbons. Sometimes progress comes from the person you didn't expect to help. The MC, who clearly wanted to be forgiven for existing, murmured into the mic, "Let's, enjoy this beautiful evening," and handed control back to the quartet. Music returned to its work like a sea resuming its breath after a dropped stone. My son came to me through a path that felt longer than it was. People parted for him. He stopped an arm's length away. "Thank you for not destroying me," he said, dry as a man who knows exactly how close he came to being publicly small. "I'm not interested in your destruction," I said. "I'm interested in your construction." His laugh was a short, surprised thing. Relief looks good on most faces. It looked like the boy he had been, briefly. We walked together to the bar. "Water," I said to Adil, and then, "Thank you." Like a sentence that stands on its own legs. He slid 2 glasses toward us. My son lifted his. "To listening," he said. "To listening," I said. We drank. The water was cold and clean, the kind that makes you feel your throat is grateful. Over his shoulder, I saw one of his groomsmen elbow another and mouthed the word sponsor with a grin like a dare. I let my son set his glass down before I addressed it. "Gentlemen," I said, flat as a table. "Not tonight, no heat, no smile." The words did the work. The grin fell off the man's face like something that never fit him. He nodded. "Sorry, sir." He was someone's son, too. I nodded back, and he will remember that better than a lecture. The bride's father came sliding across the floor dressed as ease, hands open, voice pitched to smooth. "Mr. Malik," he began, "we're all learning tonight. Emotions high, expectations. Costs," his wife supplied under her breath, not as under as she thought. I turned to him first. "Respect is cheaper than rehearsal dinners," I said, mild. He blinked. "Of course," he said quickly, and then did the thing men do when they want to be moral accountants. "You have to admit the contracts are strict." "They are clear," I said. "Clarity looks like strictness when you're used to fog." The bride, who had come up behind them, bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. She liked words used this way. I filed that away under hope. The manager drifted near again and gave me a small nod that said, "I have the back of house under control." I gestured to him. "Final song," I said quietly. "We'll keep the choice private, no announcement." He understood immediately. Good managers do. He went to the band leader, and I saw the leader's eyebrows jump and then flatten in a salute. A circle closed in my chest. A promise touched its own tail. My son checked his phone. "Gate code restored," he said, showing me the digits like a boy with a report card. Then, "Added you to the group chat." I called it home, not sponsor. He looked embarrassed to say the old name out loud. "Good," I said. Messages began to bloom on my screen. Caterer confirmation, florist's final palette, a spreadsheet tab labeled seating plan that looked like a general's map. "Tomorrow," he said, "can you come with me to the venue walkthrough? 11? "I'll be there," I said. "We'll talk entrance timing and the aisle." He blinked, surprised that I remembered the small thing he didn't know he'd care about until the moment came. "What about the ring?" he asked, softly enough that only I could hear it, and the corridor memory of blue ink in a velvet lid blinked in my mind. "Not yet," I said. "Respect becomes a man." He nodded, not quite understanding, which is fine. Some sentences ripen while you're sleeping. A server came by with small plates, spiced shrimp on toast, tiny claws pointing nowhere. "Thank you," I said, and the server's shoulders lowered a notch, the way people's bodies do when they realize you see them. The bride stepped into my space, careful, like a person approaching a dog she wants to pet but doesn't want to startle. Would you dance with me?" she asked. It had the right mix of courage and courtesy. "Of course," I said. On the floor under light that made everyone's skin look kinder, we moved in a slow circle. She was light on her feet. "I want to do this right," she said into the space between us, not toward my ear or toward the room, but toward the idea of rightness itself. "Then build a home, not a show," I said. Homes have bad lighting and great corners and people who clean up even when they didn't make the mess. Show's end. She nodded against a breath that might have been a laugh or a sigh. He listens to you, she said. He hears you, I corrected. Listening is a verb you do after you hear. She smiled, small and real. We traded partners. My son came to take her hand. He said, "Thank you," to me without saying it with words, which is a skill I will not take from him by narrating it out loud. The bridesmaids, relieved of their obligation to giggle at me, found something else to do with their mouths. The quartet handed the room over to the band, who tested a chord that made the glasses sing. The dance floor took a breath and filled. On my way back to my small table, the one behind the pillar that had become a sort of private box, the groomsman who had mouthed sponsor earlier stopped me. "Sir," he said, and he meant it now. "Your speech." "I didn't make a speech," I said. "I made a boundary." He nodded like a student watching a problem become clear. "Right." I sat. The candle had burned low, a small saucer of liquid light pooling at its center. The white rose in. The vase had opened another inch, which felt like a lesson too obvious to say out loud. I took out my phone and scrolled to the folder called Her Gift. It glowed at me. Receipts lined in tidy rows, authorization codes, contact numbers with names that felt like people I knew now. I put the phone face down. I don't worship at that altar. A child wandered over, a niece of someone, hair clipped back with something that glittered. She peered at me over the edge of the table. "Are you sad?" she asked. "Because children treat feelings like rooms you can just open if you have the right handle." "I was," I said. "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm steady." She considered that. "That's good," she decided, and ran off to chase a bubble machine that had woken in the corner and was coughing out perfect spheres like a magician with hiccups. The bride's mother made one more attempt to fold the narrative into a towel she liked the feel of. "We should get coffee," she said to me, in the tone that implies scheduling is morality. "We can talk about expectations." "We just did," I said, not unkind. "Yes," she said briskly, missing the point on purpose. "But enjoy the evening," I said, and turned my head back to the room with a slowness that made arguing look expensive. She pressed her lips into a thin line and went to find someone who would let her speak longer than I had. My son reappeared at my shoulder. "I texted the band leader," he said. "He has the last song." "I know," I said. He nodded to me. My son grinned, shy for the first time in a long while. "You see everything?" he said. "No," I said. "I just don't fill the silence with noise. The room tells you things when you leave it space." He looked down at his shoes, polished within an inch of their lives. "I have a lot to learn." "Good," I said. "Learning keeps a man in motion." People took pictures again, but they had changed their angle, the way photographers do when they realized the story moved while they were checking their settings. I caught the eye of the manager and lifted a hand the width of a thank you. He returned it with the slight smile of a man who knows his night will end without the headache he had braced for. Adil sent over a glass of plain soda with lime and pointed to himself with an expression that asked, "May I?" I lifted the glass. He thumped his chest once, a soldier being given leave. I thought of the scholarship fund that would fill more quietly because tonight wouldn't empty it for the wrong reasons. The memory of my wife came then, less like a ghost and more like wind moving a curtain. She would have hated the first half of this night. She would have loved the second. The band swelled into a song people know with their feet. The dance floor got crowded with elbows and mistakes. Laughter rose, this time with no one underneath it. I watched my son and the woman he had chosen move like two people learning the same language from scratch and getting the accent wrong in a way only they could love. He looked up for me once, found me. We didn't wave, we didn't need to. The stage lights softened and the shadows in the corners got friendly. I let my shoulders drop the last inch they had been holding. The room had shifted, not because I shouted, not because I flipped a table, because I did not. He came back once more, panting, sweat at his hairline, grin crooked with actual joy instead of performance. "Tomorrow," he said again, to make it real. 11. 11, I confirmed. He hesitated. "Bring the scarf?" "If you honor the seat," I said. "We will." He didn't wait for me to promise. He went to keep a different one, and then the band changed keys, a hint tucked inside the bridge like a hand into an inside pocket. The leader glanced at me. I tipped my head once, barely. He smiled, a tiny private thing, and let the hint ride the next chord toward the place where memory becomes music. The band leader let the bridge roll over us, and then he pulled a thread I recognized the instant it touched the air. It was the first 4 notes of my wife's favorite song, stitched soft and certain into the weave of a new arrangement. No announcement, no spotlight, just a melody that knew where to find the people it belonged to. The crowd didn't roar or point, they felt it. Good songs teach a room how to listen without telling it to be quiet. My son's head tipped like a man hearing his own name spoken from a far room. The bride's eyes went glossy and bright. She looked at me, just a heartbeat, then back to him, and they moved together to the middle like a decision. Around them, couples drifted in and found their own slow circles. I stayed where I was, behind my faithful pillar, hands on the back of the chair I had straightened a dozen times. I didn't need the center. I wanted the whole. When the chorus rose, you could feel the room soften at the edges. Even the waiters took smaller steps, as if the floor had turned to water. The bride rested her head under my son's chin and said something I didn't hear. Whatever it was, it took some of the worry out of his mouth. He closed his eyes for one measured second. When he opened them, he was looking for me. He found me. We didn't signal. We didn't need to. He held her a little closer, not like a man clutching a life raft, but like a man choosing to be exactly where he was. I thought of my wife's handwriting, those blue letters under a velvet lid. For the day respect becomes a man. The line sat inside my chest, warm as a coal that has been waiting all winter for one good night. I did not think of punishments or clauses or who heard the manager's thank you. I thought of a woman who taught a boy to tie a tie and a man to keep his voice level when the room wants him loud. I thought of the girl that boy had chosen, learning the step of apology quicker than her. Mother wanted her to. I thought of my own hands washing a sink full of dishes at midnight, while my wife drank tea and told me what kindness she had witnessed that day, as if reporting on weather that mattered more than rain. The song made its small turn into the last verse, and that's when it happened. It wasn't planned. You can't plan the moments that matter. You can only give them a room big enough to happen in. My son let go of the bride's hand for a second and walked toward me. People parted without being asked, the natural split a crowd makes when it recognizes a purpose. He didn't bring the mic. He didn't bring a speech. He brought his open face and his 2 hands. "Dance with me, Dad?" he asked, not loud enough for the room, loud enough for me. We are not a family of showpieces. We are a family of kitchens and car rides and cheering until your hands hurt. But there are times when a small, unannounced dance is not performance. It is repair done in public so the brake stops traveling. I stood. We didn't embrace like heroes. We took each other's hands the way men who know one another's weight do, and we moved 2 slow steps, 2 slower. The room felt us without staring. Someone cried softly and pretended it was the song. The bride's hand slipped into mine as we traded places for a breath, and she whispered, "Thank you," in a tone that made it a promise rather than a debt. The song ended like a good story ends, not with a slam, but with a breath that tells you it knows the world is bigger than itself. Applause came, the kind that feels like rain on metal, real, steady, grateful no longer for spectacle, but for relief. The band slid into something brighter to let the night step forward again. We didn't hold the room prisoner, we let it go. After that, things did what they do when respect returns. They worked. The food tasted better because embarrassment had been scraped off the plates. Jokes landed without landing on anyone. The bride's father approached me again, this time without a script. "You were right," he said, the words catching like a shirt on a nail. "Fog!" He didn't add but, which is how I knew he meant it. "Thank you for making sure we see the road," he added. I nodded. "Help your daughter keep it clear," I said. He nodded back, slower now. "I will." We moved through the rest of the evening like people who have learned something and want to keep it. My son thanked staff by name until saying "thank you" shook the stiffness out of him. He disappeared into the kitchen at one point and emerged with flour on his sleeve, followed by the head chef grinning like a man who had just been saluted properly for the first time that week. In the hallway, I heard my son tell the manager, "Please send any change requests through my father. If I forget and call you directly, remind me of this sentence." The manager smiled in that quiet way men smile when they like what a young man is becoming. The group chat on my phone pinged under the name Home. The bride added a note. "Chair for mom at ceremony. White scarf. Please bring it." He typed after her, Aisle length, Dad's call. Then, a minute later. Also, Dad, can we go over vows? I want them to say what they mean and not sound like copy. I type back. We can write them like letters and read them like promises. The typing dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Okay, he replied. Tomorrow at 11. I needed air. Not because the room was heavy, because it was light now. And light can be a lot if you've been carrying around something dense. I stepped onto the terrace where the city shook itself out in windows. The night had cooled, and a breeze rose from somewhere that smelled faintly of stone and wet leaves. The terrace had a view of a small pond that tried its best to be a lake. You could hear the band faintly through the glass, the bass like a heartbeat 2 rooms away. I reached into my inside pocket and felt velvet. I don't carry it every day. That would be superstition. I carried it tonight because I had been asked to sit behind a pillar, and something in me wanted company luck could sit beside. I opened the box just enough to see the ring catch a very small moon. The ink under the lid was still the same shade of sky as the day she wrote it. For the day respect becomes a man. Not a boy who shouts, not a man who demands, a man who chooses. Footsteps came soft behind me, my son's, then hers. They didn't talk. They stood next to me and took in the same view I was taking in, which told me they had learned at least one new thing tonight. Not all silence needs to be filled. It's beautiful out here, the bride said, like a person discovering that air has temperature and gifts. Yes, I said, it is, when the noise inside is done arguing with itself. She nodded. My son put his hands on the railing, then took them off. Respect for rails built by hands that clean. A new habit already forming. He turned toward me. The ring, he said, not a demand. A question placed carefully on the table between us. Not a reward, I said. A trust. He nodded, accepting terms he hadn't asked to negotiate, but understood were the only ones that mattered. I opened the box all the way, and let the moon and the pond and the last of the night's gold fall into it. I didn't hand it to him. I handed it to her. His breath caught, and he didn't hide it. Good. This wasn't mine to sell, or to save like a dragon, I said. Your mother wanted it to sit on a finger that knows what weight feels like, and doesn't drop it when the room claps. The bride didn't reach for it. She put her palm under the box like a person holding a bird she doesn't want to spook. We will honor it, she said. Not I. We, the chair, the scarf, the song, the way we speak. She glanced at my son. The way we stop ourselves when we want to perform, instead of promise. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I have a lot of stopping to practice, he said. Start with your tongue, I said. Then your pride. Pride is useful until it sets like concrete. Keep it wet. Keep it shaping. He nodded again, that new slow nod that meant he was putting the shape of the words somewhere he could find them tomorrow. Will you walk me through the aisle timing? He asked, and the question was so ordinary, it made everything perfect. We'll mark the room, I said. We'll count your steps. We'll plan where you will pause, not because the camera wants you to, but because your heart will. He looked at the pond, at the moon curling a little river on it. I like that, he said. We went back inside. The night ran the rest of itself like a good machine, hum quiet, gears oiled. People hugged without stealing, smiled without weighing what it would cost them later. I thanked the quartet and the band, the servers, the dishwashers. Yes, the dishwashers, because it is a noble thing to make the evidence of joy go away. I shook the manager's hand and told him he had saved me from anger I didn't want. He said I had saved him from a story that would have knocked months off his life. We laughed like men who understand that joking is different from mockery. When it was time to leave, my son walked me to the door. The bride came too. We stood under the portico's white arch, where moths drew reckless chalk circles around the lights. The city's cooler breath reached us from the street. He put a hand on my shoulder, not quick, not showy, a placement, as if returning a book to its correct shelf. Tomorrow, he said again, the word worn smooth now. Tomorrow, I said. And bring the scarf, the bride added. We have a chair to set. We do, I said. I stepped down into the night, the pavement still warm in spots where the day hadn't entirely let go. At home, the house smelled like itself, wood and tea and the clean cold of a room that has learned to rest. I hung my jacket, set my keys in the bowl my wife chose when we still argued cheerfully over bowls. I took the scarf from the drawer and laid it across the back of a chair to remind me. My phone buzzed once. A message from my son. "Thank you," it said. Not a paragraph, not an emoji, just 2 words that, tonight, had the right amount of weight. I didn't reply, not because I was withholding, but because I wanted that message to sit unbounced in his screen, like a coin in his pocket he could touch on his own. Morning came with the kind of sun that does not brag. I boiled water, made tea the way she taught me. Leave the bag in until the water remembers it is no longer water. I draped the scarf over my arm and went to the venue. The manager met me at the door with the same quiet competence. The ballroom looked different, empty. Tables like islands waiting for a tide. The dance floor a simple square of light. The pillar no longer a witness, but a post. My son arrived on time. The bride arrived a minute later because they are learning to meet one another where clocks overlap, not where one insists the other should be. We walked the aisle. We measured steps. We chose the corner where the quartet would land their first notes and the chair nearest the front where the scarf would sit. "Not in the middle," I said. She never wanted the middle. They nodded, and we placed the chair where someone would have to notice it rather than trip over it. We tested the microphones. "Speak like you're talking to one person at the back who needs this," I said. "Not to everyone. When you aim at everyone, nobody feels chosen." He tried it. It worked. We reviewed the vows. He crossed out a line about forever that sounded like an ad, and in its place wrote, "I will listen without waiting to speak." She crossed out a joke about in sickness and in health that her friends would have loved, and she wrote, "I will not make an audience out of you when I am scared." They looked at each other and recognized something worth believing in. The manager watched us from a respectful distance, arms folded, the way men fold their arms when they are watching a wall go up straight. At 11:45, we stood in the doorway and looked back at the room. It was empty and full at once. "You know," my son said, and there was the boy again, curious. "You could have dropped the hammer last night, and no one would have blamed you." "Dropping hammers is loud," I said. "Raising standards is quiet and lasts longer." He smiled. It wasn't the grin he uses for cameras. It was smaller and aimed at the ground, like a man practicing what his face looks like when it isn't performing. "I'll remember that," he said. "Write it down," I said. "Memory is a fog when pride is a storm." He held the door as we left. The day outside had that clean, fresh smell that cities get when the morning is new enough to forgive last night's mistakes. We shook hands, and then he pulled me into a quick, real hug. "I'm going to be better than I was yesterday," he said into my shoulder. "That's the only race worth winning," I said. He let go, eyes a little wet, not ashamed. The bride tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. He covered it with his other hand, like a book cover over a title he has decided to read, not skim. I went home with the scarf and set it back on the chair. I sat and let quiet do the work it likes to do when you invite it. The house made its small sounds, pipes talking low in the walls, a leaf tapping the window, the kettle cooling its metal throat. I thought of the boys and men I have known who mistake volume for victory. I thought of the girls and women who have had to catch the plates those men throw in the name of a laugh. I thought of a ring in a velvet box changing pockets under a small moon, of a melody that knew where to find its people, of a room learning to clap for something worth clapping for. Later, I walked down to the small lake in the park and stood where the pine smell is thickest. The water was the color of steel pretending to be silk. I breathed in and out until the breath stopped arguing with me. Somewhere behind the trees a child shouted, the sharp happiness of a good chase. I smiled. Not big, just enough. If you felt any part of this, if you've stood under a bright light and chosen to keep your voice low, if you've bought a ticket to a show and then remembered you own the theater, let me hear you. Tell me where you're reading from. Tell me the song that finds your people. And if this story found you at the right time, do the simple thing that keeps stories like this alive, like share, comment, and subscribe.